If you think that we wait for your legal counsel, or if your legal counsel will be here very soon, then we can give him a minute or two. If not, at least we have a representative from the complainant and a representative from the respondent. So we will definitely just proceed by reading the hearing. And after this hearing, we will obviously, like I said before, we will give out the PDF copy to the NEC and also to all parties involved, and the NEC will publish the final ruling to the student body in subsequent time deemed necessary by the NEC.
Hello, Jesse, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I was asking Honorable President Emeritus Greene if he will be represented by himself now as we read, or his legal counsel is coming anytime soon. If not, we will read the final hearing in the absence of his legal counsel. Honorable Greene? Okay, so we just proceed by reading the final hearing, I think. All right. Okay, December 15, 2025, the Judicial Board final hearing and declaration for the case filed by President Emeritus Emmet Greene through his legal counsel, Hassan Francis Whitfield. Now, therefore, having heard the parties, reviewed the pleadings, examined the evidence, interpreted the relevant provision of the LSUIC amended Constitution of 2020, and made the foregoing findings and declaration on count A, B, C, and D. The Honorable Judicial Board of the Liberian Student Union in China hereby orders and decree as follows. Count A, the resignation of the National Financial Secretary, issued for determination whether the failure of the national president to convene the assembly to fill the vacancy created by the resignation of the national financial secretary constitutes a violation of the LSUIC amended Constitution of 2020. The relevant constitutional provisions are Article 32A, Section 5, Article 23K, Section 2, Article 12, Section 4C, Article 32, Section 8. The board's consideration and interpretation. The board takes judicial notice that the former National Financial Secretary tendered her resignation, which took full effect on October 31st, 2024, thereby creating a vacancy within the National Executive Committee. Article 32A, Section 5 of the amended Constitution clearly and mandatorily provides that when the office of the National Financial Secretary becomes vacant, the National Executive Committee shall call the Assembly into session for the purpose of filling the vacancy. The board acknowledged and commend the National President for formally notifying the Council of Coordinators and for initiating efforts aimed at establishing an independent election commission to conduct election for the vacant position. However, such efforts, though well intended, do not substitute for the express constitutional requirement to convene the Assembly, which remains a supreme decision-making body of the Union outside of the General Conference pursuant to Article 12, Section 4C. The prolonged failure to convene the Assembly for over 8 months followed the effective resignation of the National Financial Secretary constitutes a deviation from the mandatory proceedings outlined in the Constitution. The Judicial Board declares that the national president's failure to convene the Assembly to fill the vacancy in the office of the National Financial Secretary as required under Article 32A, Section 5 of the LSUIC amended Constitution of 2020 constitutes a violation of the Constitution, notwithstanding the efforts made to engage the Council of Coordinators. Count B, the resignation of the National Secretary General. Issue for determination whether the appointment of an acting National Secretary General by the National President follows the resignation of the substantive National Secretary General violate the LSUIC amended Constitution. Relevant constitutional provisions, Article 32, Section 2 and 3, Article 32A, Section 4 and 5, Article 14, Section 4D, Article 31, Section 2. The Board's declaration. Upon the resignation of the former National Secretary General, the Constitution mandates under Article 32A, Section 4, and Article 14, Section 4D, that the board found that the appointment of an acting national secretary by the national president under the prevailing circumstances and subject to constitutional oversight does not constitute a violation of the Constitution. Upon the resignation of the National Secretary General, the Constitution clearly under Article 32A, Section 4, and Article 14, Section 4D, that the National Deputy Secretary General shall succeed to the office of the National Secretary General and complete their unexpired term. However, based on the evidence adduced before the board, it is established that the serving National Deputy Secretary General expressly declined or refused to assume the office of the National Secretary General. The board holds that such refusal is inconsistent with the mandatory nature of the term shall, as employed by the Constitution, and therefore amounts to serious constitutional infraction. The Deputy Secretary General refusal to ascend to the office effectively created a vacancy in the position of the National Secretary General. The Constitution is silent on the specific procedure to be followed where a constitutional designated successor refuses to assume office. In the presence of this constitutional vacuum and in order to avert administrative paralysis, the board finds that the national president acted within his residue executive authority by appointing an acting national secretary general. The board further noticed that the national president duly informed the Council of Coordinators of the vacancy. The refusal of the national deputy secretary general to ascend made reasonable effort to ensure that an election for the position was conducted. Though such effort did not yield result. Accordingly, the appointment of an acting national secretary general, subject to confirmation and oversight of the Council of Coordinators as provided under Article 32, Section 2 and 3, was constitutionally permissible and lawful. The National Deputy Secretary General shall succeed the office of the National President of the National Secretary, to complete the unexpired term. The board finds, based on the evidence before it, that the serving National Secretary General refused to assume the office. And such refusal is a contradiction of our Constitution. The board final declaration. The Judicial Board hereby declares that the refusal of the National Deputy Secretary General to assume the office of the National Secretary General constitute a violation of the LSUIC 2020 amended Constitution, and the appointment of an acting National Secretary General by the National President under the prevailing circumstances and subject to constitutional oversight did not amount to a violation of the Constitution. Count C, the refusal to issue clearance to Scholar Orlando T. Blah, issued for determination whether the refusal of the National Secretary General to issue a clearance to Scholar Blah following the binding judicial board ruling constitute a violation of the LSUIC amended Constitution of 2020. Relevant constitutional provision, Article 37, Section 3, Article 16, Section 12 and 16, Article 28, Section 9. The board interpretation. The board takes judicial notice that it rendered a final and binding decision directing the National Secretary General to allow Scholar Blah to reapply for clearance in accordance with Judicial Opinion number 3JB33 2025 0622. Article 37, Section 3 explicitly states that the decision of the Judicial Board is final and binding on all members and organs of the Union, while Article 16, Section 16 mandates strict compliance with all declarations and orders issued by the Board. The refusal by the National Secretary General to issue the clearance, even after the reapplication was made pursuant to both rulings, constitute a direct defiance of the authority of the Judicial Board and undermines constitutional governance within the Union. The Board acknowledges that issues surrounding electoral registration, generated significant tension within the Union. In the interest of the institutional stability and reconciliation, certain matters were addressed through consultative engagement involving the NEC and other stakeholders. Discussions, however, do not negate the constitutional breach arising from the initial refusal to comply with both orders. The final declaration. The Board hereby declares that the refusal of the National Secretary General to issue clearance to Scholar Orlando T. Blah after a final and binding judicial order constitutes a violation of Article 16 and 37 of the LSUIC Constitution of 2020 and amount to the defiance of internal judicial authority. Count D. The circulation issued by the National Vice President, issue for determination whether the circulation issued by the National Vice President in support of the appointment of an acting National Secretary General violate the LSUIC amended Constitution of 2020, the relevant constitutional provisions, Article 31, Section 2, H and 2I, Article 38, Section 2, Article 14, Section 4D. The Board's consideration and interpretation. The Board recognized that the National Vice President issued the circular with a stated intention of providing clarity to the membership. However, the Board finds that the portion of the circulation stating that there is no violation of the revised LSUIC Constitution of 2020 when the National Deputy Secretary General accepts or rejects the offer is constitutionally inaccurate. Article 38, Section 2 clearly defines the word shall as mandatory. According to the National Deputy Secretary General, the National Deputy Secretary General does not possess discriminatory authority to accept or reject succession to the office of the National Secretary General. Any communication suggesting otherwise misinterprets the Constitution and undermines its authority. Final declaration. The Judicial Board hereby declares that the cited portion of the National Vice President Circular contravened the spirit and letter of the LSUIC amended Constitution of 2020, particularly Article 14 and Article 38, and hereby undermined constitutional governance within the Union. With the reading of the final ruling from the board, we hereby submit. Honorable Senior Adjudicator, it's over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, His Honor Variety, for reading the declaration of the board based on the Constitution. And let me welcome our fellow adjudicators who just joined. Our Honor Chisman, you are welcome. His Honor Jesse S. Nolan, you are welcome. So, the board, after reading all of what we had, the pieces of evidence provided, and in acquiescence of the Constitution, the board came up with the following rulings that were just read by His Honor Variety. So, the final copy will be transmitted to the NEC for publication, and then to all parties that are involved. Having said that, the board who would like to officially bring a closure on this case. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Honorable Senior Adjudicator. So all parties for the final hearing can probably drop the call.